I'm not doing my email, I'm just checking the time, so that's just wanted to be sure. Thank you very much, Rudy. It's a great honor to be here. It was a terrific honor that HEC paid me yesterday, and I'm eternally grateful to be in one of my favorite cities in the world, near, actually, my favorite cafe, Le Dumédo. And it's been a real treat. I only wish I could stay longer, but I have 70 papers to grade when I go back that way there. I wrote this old stakeholder book in 1984, and I didn't think it just doesn't sound strange. I didn't think the stakeholder idea was very interesting. Why? It was too common sense. I mean, I grew up poor on a farm in Georgia, in the U.S., and we knew, even though we were poor and didn't really have anything, but we knew we needed to deal with the people that could affect us and the people that we could affect. I mean, that was sort of life 101. And then when I wrote about that, people thought, well, this is radical. And I kind of missed it. I gave it to my wife to read before I published it. She was a Wharton MBA, and she said in her inimitable way, well, this is common sense. You'll never make a living at this. There was, I thought, a really interesting idea in the book. And I thought, this is going to be the thing I will make my academic reputation on. It's an idea I called enterprise strategy or purpose. And we said, well, you know, the first question of strategy in those days is where are we going or what business are we in? And I thought a better question was, what do you stand for? If you could answer what do you stand for, then that would set some boundaries around what business you were in. And I thought this was the thing that was going to really make a mark in strategy, and nobody cared, it turns out. And no one has ever sort of, I thought there were going to be dozens of PhD dissertations on enterprise strategy, and this was going to really change the world. It's an idea that's in Peter Drucker and some other places. And there were 0 dissertations on enterprise strategy. So it warms my heart to see so many people gathered together to talk about purpose. And I really enjoyed sitting in on some of the sessions this afternoon and learned a great deal. I think your existence and what you're doing is more evidence that the old story of business needs to be abandoned. What's the old story? Business is about the money. It's about, making money for shareholders. It's about lazy, good-for-nothing people who you have to incentivize in order to get them to do something. It's about seeing human beings as one-dimensional maximizers of our own short-term self-interest. And that story, if it was ever useful, is certainly not useful for the challenges that we see today. The good news is there's a new story. It's a new story, a new narrative, and it's being written by you, by your companies, as you take on ideas like purpose. The new story, my short form of the new story is stakeholders, purpose, values and ethics, societal issues are at least as important as money and profits. And that profits actually follow, or it's possible that profits follow from these ideas. No guarantees, but the question of possibility, I think, has been answered. I want to talk briefly about each of these ideas, but I want to emphasize that they're all connected. You can't think about purpose in isolation from the others. You can't think about the others in isolation from purpose. So the first idea I'm going to talk about, no surprise, stakeholders. Every business has always created, or sometimes destroyed, value for customers, suppliers, employees, communities, people with money. That's just what business is. That's why I thought it was such a ridiculously simple and common sense idea. Building and leading a business involves getting these interests going in the same direction. The phrase I like is, you need to harmonize their interest. Harmony, because in music, the notes are different, but when they're in harmony, they sound pretty good together. And so getting these interests harmonized is a way to think about it. I don't like saying getting them aligned, because they're never going to be the same. And you don't want them to be the same. Now, this is a lot easier if you have a sense of purpose, it seems to me. It's a lot easier to get these interests in the same tune as the purpose. But it's also easier to do if you have a sense of ethics, if you have a sense that business is a societal institution as well as a market institution. Let me take just a minute and talk about what creating value for stakeholder means, at least to me, because that gets misinterpreted a lot. It gets misinterpreted as this is just about civil society. It gets misinterpreted as it's about making everybody happy. It gets misinterpreted as it's corporate social responsibility. And for me, let me be clear, it's about the business model. What's a business? A business just is. A business model is how you're going to create value simultaneously for customers, suppliers, employees, communities, and the people with the money. And the "and" is very important. The important thing to see, and all of you in business know this, stakeholders are interdependent. How you deal with one depends on how you deal with the others. Think for a minute about, you can write the value created for shareholders as some function of the value you created for all the others. It's how much money you make. It's a function of how you deal with customers and suppliers and employees and communities. And that's true for each one. They're interdependent. Their interests need to be harmonized without thinking about trade-offs. Economists love trade-offs. Pragmatist philosophers, not so much. Why? Because if you look for trade-offs, I'm gonna take away from this stakeholder and give over here. You can do that. Trade-offs are easy. What's hard is to figure out how to both win. What's hard is figuring out wins. And if you can figure that out, you can't always, you can build a great business. Thinking about stakeholders is thinking about relationships, not transactions. What does it mean to think about relationships? We know this in our personal lives. If I'm in a relationship with somebody, there's a presumption it's going to continue. Both parties have to care about the other, right? Companies need to actually care about their customers and their employees, etc. And if they don't, pretty much their customers and employees, etc., can tell. And there's this idea that if you're in a relationship with somebody, you don't have to keep score every day. It's not about transactions where you try to decide who won this one. You know, was this price too high or too low? Did I get a good price, etc. I've been married for a long time. I need to figure out the number of years exactly pretty soon, because I know I have an anniversary coming up. I think it's going to be 47, but I'm not going to bet the ranch on that right now. And if I were to go down to my wonderful spouse's office at Darden and say, "Hey, babe, you know, I've been thinking. I think you're ahead by 3. I think you owe me 3. You know, that's the score after 46 years." I'm pretty sure I know what the answer to that would be. She's a 2nd-degree black belt in Taekwondo, and I've had both my hips replaced, so I can't run real fast. So that would not be necessarily healthy for me. Thinking about stakeholders is thinking about relationships. And the only way to do this, same as in a marriage, is continuous engagement and two-way conversation. Both of those things turn out to be centrally important. Second idea, purpose. Business, I believe, is primarily about purpose. Money and profits can follow as an outcome. The old story of business just gets purpose wrong. They say the purpose of business is to make as much money as possible. As much money for shareholders subject to law and ethical custom, if you want to really read Milton Friedman. And that's a lot like saying, you know, I got to have red blood cells to live, right? I'm on good scientific ground with that. But the purpose of my life is not to make red blood cells. And even when I can tell you it wasn't a very pleasant time, I had to have both my hips replaced. And I actually had to worry about making red blood cells. It's a long time ago, big surgery, 4.5 pints of blood. So I had to worry about that. Still wasn't the purpose of my life. Business must make profits. They must make profits at least at the weighted average cost of capital, which is some complicated finance thing. It's always about 10%, but that's their gig, so I'm not going to say anything about that. But it doesn't follow without a lot more argument that making money is the purpose of business. The entrepreneurs I know don't start a business to make as much money as they can. If I have students who come to me and say, hey, I'm going to start this business, we're going to flip it, it's going to be a unicorn, I'm going to be rich, I tell them to get a job. Because it's a hell of a lot easier to get rich having a job than it is to start a business. That's hard. Starting a business is really hard, and you're completely destroyed several times before you figure it out. Entrepreneurs don't start businesses. Like, they start businesses because they're on fire about something. Whether it's Bill Gates on fire about the computer revolution, whether it's a friend of mine, John Mackey, on fire about having us eat better food and starting Whole Foods. A friend of mine who runs this little restaurant, or did until it closed, in Copenhagen called Noma, seen as one of the best restaurants in the world, said, we didn't start Noma to make as much money as we can because we didn't make any for the first 19 years. Now, we've heard a little this afternoon about, in the session before, about dissent. And I took it, I was a little unclear, but I think people meant about dissent from people inside a company who disagreed with the purpose. I think dissent plays an incredibly crucial role, but I want to see it a little bit differently. I want to talk about people who believe in the purpose, but think you're not living it, right? Their dissent is incredibly. You want to know when you're not living your purpose. I don't know about you, but my children are pretty clear about this with me. I was once telling my son, who was about 10, that I couldn't take him to the father-son basketball camp. I had to be in Indonesia. He looked at me. He's 10 now, so this is not the little teenager stuff. He's 10. He said, Dad, what's more important, your family or your job? And I said, my family, of course, Ben. And he said, well, you're not living it, you're not doing it. And and you know what? He was right. I could have scheduled this Indonesia trip whenever I wanted. He was very proud. I'd won the 3-point shooting contest the year before, and he wanted me to go defend that. And I just didn't think about it. And I said to him, I think you're right. I got to go to Indonesia because I made a commitment. I said, but next year I won't travel. I'll coach your team. We'll hang out. And I did that the next several years. And we created a lot of value. But we created value because he pushed back. He doesn't push back, we don't create that value. How much value gets left on the table in companies because people don't push back? People don't dissent. They don't say, I don't think we're living this. If purpose matters, you must build in dissent. You must build in people disagreeing with the words on the paper that you're living it. If you don't build that in, my advice is don't have anything to do with thinking about purpose because you'll just disappoint people. Everybody knows the story of Johnson & Johnson of extra strength Tylenol. 8 people died. What most people don't know is that the year before that, Jim Burke, the CEO, went around to groups of managers at J&J and said, here's our purpose. It's called the Credo. And let's figure out where we're living it, where we're not. Let's take it down if we need to. And they had a conversation about that. And they would come up with things that they needed to change in the company. if they were serious about their credo. This got built into the management development process. And guess what? That's one of the things that made J&J a high-purpose company for a long time. So this idea of pushback and dissent, not among people who disagree with the purpose, essentially high-purpose companies will eject those people like a virus over time. But the people who do agree, who are going to hold your feet to the fire, like my son held my feet to the fire, that's what you want to create value. The purpose conversation, to me, I think of it as a conversation, not a statement. Purpose doesn't live in the purpose statement, I'm sorry to say. It lives in the processes, it lives in the systems, it lives in how people treat each other every day, you know? And if you can't take those things on as a live conversation, you know, I've been in companies where people said, yeah, we have values. I've got a values card here somewhere. I'm not sure what, you know. And my sense is you don't have one. If purpose doesn't go all the way through the organization, you don't really have one. I remember sitting with the CEO and his top 50 people or so in a session, and he said they knew they needed to change their purpose statement. And he said, how many people, look at the old state statement. How many people have ever made a decision ever with this in mind? There were no hands in the room. So, yeah, there was some stuff on paper, but it didn't matter. And they were willing to do the hard work to not only craft a new statement, but to begin to set their processes and systems up against this to see if they were really living it. In short, purpose is in the details, not just the statement. Well, I think I'm pretty optimistic that there are lots of companies, as Hubert said, who are trying to deal with this now. And what a good purpose statement and process can be, a good conversation is, it's inspiring. You inspire people. Suppose this side of the room is motivated and incentivized, and this side of the room, and MBA'd and management up, all that sort of stuff, and this side of the room is inspired. You show up because you think it's absolutely important for you to be there every day, both for the people next to you and given what you're doing. And let's suppose you're in the same industry. Who's going to win? They're going to beat you 1,000,000-0. They're going to have to make up competition because you're not going to be much, right? And it's that inspiration for people that's so important that gives the possibility of this working and making more money, but also making meaning. Purpose asks you it sets the stage for value creation for stakeholders. It makes you ask, does your organization make a difference? Lots of people from investment managers to CEOs have talked a lot about purpose and what that means. I don't need to quote all these examples to you, but again, inspiring us, giving us meaning, giving us discipline. Purpose tells us what it's possible to do and what it's not possible to do. It helps us facilitate collaborating together, harmonizing stakeholder interest, and helping to solve our most difficult problems. Again, I would say the challenges here are that the statements are the first steps. The integration with everyday processes and systems is hard. Integration with key stakeholders is difficult. And there's the necessity of values and ethics. We had a situation a few years ago where a high-purpose organization came to our university and marched. They're Nazis. They were very well organized, and they had a purpose. So Purpose has to go with values and ethics. Those things have to go together. I think we don't understand how values work quite enough. If I were to say to you, look, we've got this ethics issue that's just come up, and I really want us to deal with this ethics issue right now with the rest of our time. How many of you, I'll take a show of hands, just thought, oh, somebody's figured out something real cool that's going to make our lives better? Anybody? No, of course not, because we think about values and ethics as the bad stuff. But think about it for a minute. If business gets credit for the bad stuff, and it should, shouldn't it get credit for the good stuff as well? But we don't think about that. When I tell people I teach business ethics, they have to kind of manage not to laugh, as some of you are not doing. And they tell me things like, must be a short course, or I didn't know business had any, or two words, you put them together, contradiction, oxymoron, like jumbo shrimp, or American football is another oxymoron. I played and I don't know the rules. Most organizations underperform because they don't understand how values work. Again, the idea of challenge has to be central here. And we need to do values as well as purpose. We need to do it right, or I think we need not to do it at all. CEO said to me once, by the time an issue gets to me, it's been washed and dried and scanned and PowerPointed and cleaned up and everything. I don't really know what the underlying issues are by the time I get it. So what I have to do is figure out what's the set of questions that I want the people who work for me to ask. And if we can figure out that set of questions, then I got a better shot at making the hard decisions that are there. Another bunch of CEOs said, on this last idea I'm going to talk about societal issues, business being an important societal actor. They say, Ed, we don't really know how to deal with this. We don't know how to decide whether I should deal with this issue or that issue. Should I deal with inequality? Should I deal with women's rights? How do I decide that? And I think the answer to that is actually deceptively easy. Do you have a purpose conversation? Does your organization not just have a set of values, but have a live set of values so that people talk about that all the time? And do you really understand what stakeholders you're trying to serve? Well, all of these ideas need a view of human beings that is sophisticated. Human beings are not, they're not one-dimensional maximizers of their own self-interest. Yeah, we can be that way, but anybody who's ever been in love or who's ever, had a child knows we're capable of so much more. We're capable of bad stuff too, but we're also capable of incredible acts of kindness and heroism and just helping other people. And so this idea, in other words, we're both self-interested and other-regarding at the same time. Yeah, incentives can be important, but so are values. So let's take these ideas about stakeholders, purpose, ethics and values, seeing business as a societal institution, and seeing human complexity for all it's worth in business. And let's create a different, more responsible, and just better version of business. We all know in our hearts it's the right thing to do. There are no guarantees, however. No guarantees you're going to make more money. It's possible that you will, and people have demonstrated that pretty much, as we talked about in the last session. But there are no guarantees here. But there are two things here that I would close with here. The first is, does anybody possibly know or ever heard of a guitarist named Warren Haynes? And those of you who heard me talk yesterday weren't listening, because I said, no, just joking. Warren Haynes is a great blues guitarist, and he was. I was watching a video of him trying to teach people to play slide guitar. Any guitarists here? Gotta be a few. And you know, when you play slide, when you learn to play slide, it's like you're killing the cat with evil intent. That's pretty much what it sounds like. So Warren Haynes is doing this. I'm struggling trying to do it. And he stops, and he says, "Now, see, when you play the blues, it doesn't matter how many notes you play. You just have to mean the notes that you play. The world is coming at us at a very fast pace. It may be at a very fast pace that we human beings can't deal with. I hope that's not true. But what's critical for us is that we figure out not just playing a bunch of notes, we figure out the notes that we mean. Anybody who's ever heard B.B. King play that kind of one-note pull-off, of which there's more emotion and style and grace in that one note than there is in the 87 played by other people, knows. Figure out the notes you mean to play. That's what the conversation about purpose has to do. And finally, on a personal sense, I get asked all the time, what's the kind of one trade-off? And I said this last night, I'll say it again. I've said it a lot of times, if you've seen videos. It's a rule I like to call the Ben, Emma, and Molly rule that says, that names my 3 kids. Can I go home? Can I say to Ben, Emma, and Molly, let me tell you what I did today that I'm proud of, that I want you to learn from. If we're not trying to make our organizations places for our children to live in, we'd have the bar too low. We certainly need to do that. We need to do it with our churches and mosques and synagogues and schools and universities and certainly our corporations. Thank you very much. I'd be happy to answer questions that you have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ed. So it's time for questions. So may I suggest that actually we take 3 questions in a row so that, Ed, you can answer them all or just pick some. So there should be some mics circulating here. Yes.
What advice would you give to the developer of a wind farm in France, faced with the challenge of the locals who say, great, we're all for wind power, but just not here?
Yeah, those, oh, sorry, you know, 2 more. Yeah.
2 more.
Right, okay.
Mic is coming.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor. What advice would you give to HEC faculty and the school for them, for us, to train better leaders who allow for challenge?
Yeah.
Do we actually meet our purpose or not? Have you seen any clues? Have you seen any schools doing stuff that inspired you, that we could draw inspiration from to train better leaders?
Okay.
And the third?
I've transmitted my jet lag to everybody, I see.
In companies, we are building some stakeholder committees in order to bring value from stakeholders to the company. What advice can you give us in order to select the stakeholders that should be part of the stakeholder committees?
I'm not sure I quite understand. Just say
I will repeat, no issue.
Yeah.
In groups, we are building some stakeholder committees in order to challenge the management, the top management of the group. What advice can you give us in order to select the stakeholders that should be part of the stakeholder committees?
Great. Okay. Got it. NIMBY, I don't know what to do about. You know, you have to engage and engage again and again and again. I once said, I asked a group of Japanese managers who said, I said, what would you do if you couldn't get this stakeholder to agree? And they said, we'd go out and talk some more until we got their agreement. And I said, yeah, but you know, you can't. It doesn't work. You can't get their agreement. And they said, we would go and talk some more until we got their agreement. And I said, but yeah, really, you can't. I'll stay here. Really, you can't get them. They just won't come around. And they said, we'd go out and talk some more until we got their agreement. So I don't know much better than that, other than to say stakeholders are paid in multiple currencies. And oftentimes we're not creative enough to think about those multiple currencies that are there. And this would lead me to the second question. I think the most important thing for business schools to do is, yes, we need to do economics and finance and data and all that sort of stuff as kind of, that's the table stakes. But what we really need to do is to teach folks how to use their creative imagination. Because it's the creative imagination that will help us find win-win-wins. And I think at most business schools, again, I'm not making a claim about yours or mine. We're not very good at that. We're good at the table stakes. We're not very good at the critical, creative stuff. And that means more liberal arts. And I think that's what we need. That's what we need to do. In terms of getting stakeholder committees to work, I really don't know. I'm not a big fan of that. I think mostly what you do is you do one-on-one engagements. Because when you put together, unless you're really good at doing this, you often can create more problems than you solve. So I like to think about one-on-one engagements that are there and doing those over and over and over again, then maybe adding some, etc. Now, if you think about stakeholder committees that are just civil society oriented, those are okay, but for me, stakeholders are also customers and suppliers and employees, and trying to figure out their currencies, their behaviors, is really central, I think.
So let's take a second round of 3 questions, as we have like 5 minutes to go before moving to the next part.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your remarks tonight, Professor. I wonder if you might share a bit about your view of how the Business Roundtable in the United States, in terms of the stakeholder capitalism and that, how it's been attacked like so many things, and do you feel like it's met the objectives? Is it the way it's being interpreted now by politically interested groups? Maybe give us some ideas on that.
Next. Don't be shy.
We have someone over here.
Hello. I was really enjoyed your comment about what I'm proud of and what we need to learn from. But my sort of corollary question was, once we've done that reflection, what first step should we take to move those reflections into action?
Okay, I just missed the first part.
Oh, sorry. You said what I'm proud of and what we need to learn from. Yeah?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
And the last one?
Hello, thank you, Professor Freeman, for being here and telling us about the great stories about the stakeholders and how your wife mentioned it was just everyday life practice. I had a question about what's happening in Europe after the Loi Pact and the fact that companies can put in their company statutes not only their purpose but their commitment axis. Is it something that you see emerging in the States and something that you see as a positive way to integrate stakeholders in the everyday life of a company?
Well, I'll take that first and say, look, sunshine helps everything. So, not forced sunshine. Forcing you to disclose, I think, can be helpful, but voluntary disclosure is best. More companies are doing that. And there's a company that it's a not-for-profit called Just, J-U-S-T, Capital. And Just Capital ranks the Russell 1000, they're all public companies, ranks them in terms of justice, by which they mean how are they doing with customers and suppliers, No, they don't use suppliers. Customers, employees, communities, shareholders, and the environment, I think. And they rank them. After George Floyd, companies pledged $50 billion to deal with racial inequality. Just Capital keeps score in terms of what they're doing. And if you go to the Just Capital website, you'll see what they're trying to do in terms of how they measure what companies are doing. And I think that's a really good thing. It throws sunshine on stuff that's not always in the sun. I'm just trying to remember the other two questions. My mind is gone.
The first two. So you had a question.
Oh, right. Just give me a word or two again. So I
was looking at what I'm proud of,
right.
what we learn from that first step once you've reflected.
What's next?
Yeah.
Well, I learned that, I learned that from my kids. And we always treated our kids as human beings. We talk to them about most anything. Nothing's off the record. They could say whatever they wanted. We told them if they said certain words, we weren't going to bail them out at school, But we always sort of tried to have pretty free and open conversations with them. Ethics to me is about conversations. It's about the kind of conversations you can have because they're about how we're going to live. And that's ultimately kind of the most important thing that you can do. On this business about the backlash, you asked. First of all, I didn't have anything to do. I was once academic director of this Business Roundtable Institute, but we didn't really do anything. We hadn't really done anything with that for the past 10 years, really. That was an old position on my CV. But my fist was raised in the air when they came out with it as, yes, finally, they did it. And I saw, a good deal of mine and others' ideas in that. It was an important symbolic gesture. Did all 181 companies really mean it? No, of course not. Have some of them made progress? Absolutely. That's what Just Capital is keeping up with and why it's a good thing. I think it was a watershed moment because here, 181 of the largest U.S. companies said, this shareholder value thing doesn't work anymore. It said the old story doesn't work anymore. Now, that doesn't mean we're still not in the grip of the old story, but that's hard to shake off, I don't think we need to think about profits versus purpose, or stakeholders versus shareholders, or people being economically driven versus more human driven. The word between those things is and. Profits are important. The idea that they're wrong, that they're somehow evil is a silly idea. And so it's putting the and in that, enhancing the old story so that we can normally think about purpose and profits, stakeholders and shareholders, etc. And so I think that was an important watershed moment. I try not to pay too much attention to the politicians who don't care about whether what they say is right or not. Because my faith, maybe we'll be able to fix that. I doubt it, but maybe we will. I'm optimistically skeptical. I think that's the phrase. But my faith for having a world created that's still around for my children is in you. It's in business. It's in what you do that, of course, makes money, but, of course, makes the world better. The problem is, the real paradox here is, I don't know how much time we have. And that's the really critical thing. What we need are thousands of experiments. We need to become a nation of entrepreneurs because that's going to be, in my view, what saves us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ed, again.